Well, thank you for welcoming me here today. My name is Dr. Greg Noone, and I've been at Roger Williams University Law School since 1996. One of the courses that I've taught there is genocide and atrocity crimes, and focusing on war crimes, crimes against humanity, and of course genocide, and then looking at the accountability piece. By way of background, I served 30 years as a United States Navy judge advocate, meaning a lawyer in the United States Navy in uniform. Retired as a Navy captain, and I worked in 96 countries during my time in the military. My main job in the military was to train foreign militaries in human rights and international humanitarian law. So I worked in the accountability piece in Rwanda after the genocide. I led the teams into Bangladesh, where we did the investigation into what happened in the Rohingya, and we interviewed 1,024 Rohingya and wrote a report that went to the Department of State, which is what Secretary Blinken used to make that determination on behalf of the United States of America that genocide had occurred in Myanmar. So I've spent a lot of time out in the field, spent a lot of time in law school classrooms. I will tell you a lighthearted note. Many years ago, they moved my classroom, and they put signs up around the school that said genocide is now being held in room 285. Needless to say, it panicked the dean, and he ran to room 285 to see what was going on, because he got quite concerned. But that's a brief introduction of who I am and where I've been. And again, thank you for inviting me. I wanted to talk about some of those concepts in international law, international humanitarian law, and with respect to what's happening in Ukraine. I've been working with different organizations in Ukraine since the invasion in 2014. And certainly everything is amped up since February of 2022 of this year. One of the organizations that I've had the privilege of working with and training is the Center for Civil Liberties, who just received the Nobel Peace Prize. So that was really, really fascinating to work with them and to watch everything that's gone on since the announcements. I will tell you one kind of side note. As I was giving them a training last week, and the person running the training was one of the men that works there. And we were talking before we got on the camera, and I said, "Oh, are you looking forward to going to Stockholm for the presentation?" He said, "No, I cannot go. No men of my age can leave the country because of martial law, because of what we're undergoing right now." And I hadn't thought of it in those terms. So a delegation that will be there when they receive the Nobel Peace Prize will only be the women who work in the organization, and just one of those things that you don't think of until someone actually tells you. So let's talk about where this body of law fits in and how it impacts what's going on in Ukraine. As you're all aware, we live under a human rights umbrella on our everyday lives, human rights enshrined in our constitutions and our domestic laws, as well as international law. And this is and those are sometimes called civil rights, civil liberties, but these are our human rights. Whereas when there's an armed conflict, it is the law of armed conflict that takes precedent. So when we're inside the actual armed conflict, it's the law of armed conflict, sometimes referred to as international humanitarian law, sometimes referred to as the law of war. They all mean the same thing. Law of armed conflict, international humanitarian law, law of war, they all mean the same thing. But it's that body of law that takes over inside that armed conflict box. So of course, the first thing we need to do is determine whether or not there's an armed conflict. In the case of Ukraine, it's easy. State A has rolled across the border into state B and started shooting at them. Classic interstate conflict, so it's an easy one. It gets harder in other scenarios when we're only within state A and there's different groups fighting within state A, and we have an internal armed conflict. The law refers to it as a non-international armed conflict. And that can get a little bit murkier, a little muddier. And the reality of it is that there's a lot of question as to which laws apply when it's an internal armed conflict, because there's only a handful of law out of the law of armed conflict. in an internal armed conflict, whereas in an international armed conflict, you have all the law applied. So in an international armed conflict, you have pounds or kilograms of law, where in a non-international armed conflict, you only have a few ounces, a few grams of law. And so that's when we start looking at what human rights can do for us to help kind of fill those gaps when it's in an internal armed conflict. But in the case of Ukraine, it being an international armed conflict, the full body applies, all the Geneva Conventions, all the Hague Conventions, all the customary international law applies to the conflict. So what are we looking at? Well, the law of armed conflict really has four fundamental principles. First fundamental principle is the concept of military necessity. Military necessity is what allows us to go and fight and win the conflict. The enemy submit as soon as possible, but you cannot violate international law in doing so. So military necessity is not a defense to some action that you've taken on the battlefield because you say, well, in terms of expedience, of military necessity, we had to do this. You can't burn down the hospital and then use military necessity as a defense because you violated international law. The second piece would be distinction. And distinction has two parts. First, you must distinguish what you're shooting at, what you're targeting. You must only target military objectives, and you cannot target civilians and civilian objects. The second part of distinction is this concept that you must distinguish yourself from the civilian population. So that's why when you saw right away when the Ukrainians were putting in national defense, of course, you had the Ukrainian military, but then you had a lot of civilians who wanted to join and join the fight. You had foreigners that came in and wanted to join the fight. But you'll notice right from the very beginning, the Ukrainians who joined the fight had a blue or yellow armband, tape on their sleeve or on their helmet, because they were marking themselves. They would distinguish themselves from the civilian population. So the second part of distinction is you're not allowed to blend into the civilian population and engage in the fight. You must distinguish yourself from that. The third one is proportionality. Proportionality is often discussed in layman terms with respect to collateral damage. This concept that some civilian objects may get killed, injured, destroyed because there's a military objective. And so there's a balancing test. What are the expected civilian casualties, civilian damage? And will it be in excess? So will it be excessive in relation to the direct and concrete military advantage that we anticipate? So we're looking at taking out something, and it's a lawful target, but we know that there are civilians around. So will the expected civilian casualties be excessive in balance to the direct and concrete military advantage that we anticipate to be gained? So those are a lot of conditional words, right? Expected, excessive, anticipated. So there's a lot of gray in that. There's no chart on the wall that says, a brigadier general is worth 5 civilian casualties. There's nothing like that. So we have to undertake this analysis. So really, when we're undertaking this analysis, intelligence will be our Achilles heel here. Intelligence, whether or not, how many civilians are there, what the military objective is exactly, and what we anticipate will be gained by this. So let's take a 5-story building. And on the 5th and the 4th floor, we have a lawful military objective. And we'll define a little bit what that might be. Maybe it's just a bunch of soldiers taking a nap. Maybe it's the command and control center that's running the battle space. Maybe it's Vladimir Putin visiting his troops. So there's all of them are targetable. But what level, how important, what's the direct and concrete military advantage to be gained by taking out that target? On the 3rd floor is an insurance company. On the 2nd floor is a florist. On the 1st floor is a daycare center with children in it. When can we target this building? We know we have a lawful target that we can hit, but what's the balancing? What's the expected civilian casualties? Will it be excessive? in light of what we anticipate to be gain. So we can talk about what the ways that we would take out that building. And again, I don't want to sound cavalier when I talk about taking things out and targeting and things like that. War is a horrible, destructive, chaotic, brutal environment, and that causes untold death and misery, and for decades to come, psychological and physical harms. But the reality of it is that when we're talking about this body of law, we need to understand what can we target, what can we not target, what's off limits, what can we target. So how are we going to take this building? And we need to start looking at what the direct and concrete advantage is. So we're looking at what we're going to gain militarily by taking out a few soldiers who are taking a nap compared to Vladimir Putin. And then we're going to look at how many civilians are at the insurance company. How many civilians are at the florist? How many civilians? How many kids are at the daycare center? So any ideas on some of the ways we might want to target? I know many of you have your camera off and you're muted because you're like, hey, I'm just going to hang out here and listen. But anyone want to give a thought? I have a couple people off camera, but I'm not going to call on people. That's just mean. But I mean, any thoughts on how we target that building? What are some of the ways that would come to mind? Always the danger of calling on black boxes with people's names on them, right?
Do it.
All right, let's go. Let's go with my cousin, Mafalda Nunes. I probably botched the pronunciation of that. Mafalda?
Mafalda, are you there? Yeah.
Hi, I'm here. I'm just not in a place where I can talk because I'm waiting for the bus.
Okay.
Because I had to, but I'm here.
But you are here.
Not a problem. Not a problem. But very quickly, based on the scenario that I gave you on the 5-story building with military targets on floor 4 and 5, what would be one way you think militarily we could take that building out?
I really can't hear you because the bus is here. Okay. It's very confusing. I'm really sorry. I can't hear you right now.
No problem. No problem. We'll give you the bus pass. All right. Anyone else want to jump in? Christina, you look like you were paying attention. I have a feeling you're faculty, so I'm not going to call on you, but
I mean, I can answer because I'm a Ukrainian myself. And this topic is very, very interesting for me. I guess, of course, if you talk that on this last floor of this 5-story building is going to be Putin, my first initial thought is to kill him and to do everything just for him to disappear. But as a lawyer, I would think that we need to take measures which are reasonable. So we need to think how we can evacuate those people. We need to think about what should we do to prevent them from dying if we make some military actions. Because from my experience in Ukraine, a lot of people, for example, in Kherson, where they were fighting and deliberating a lot of cities and a lot of territory, they were telling civilians to evacuate. They were providing people with buses, with cars, with evacuation trains and all of that stuff to prevent that. Of course, a lot of civilians have died, but a lot of it happened also because they refused to evacuate, for example. And I cannot blame soldiers for that. I think that they did all of the, I cannot blame Ukrainian soldiers for that. I think that they did all of the measures to protect civilians, but yeah, they did what they needed to do. So we should also look at the factor of just regular people would they listen, would they not? But I think if we are talking about not about the city or territory, but about the building, evacuation and taking all of the measures and then making Putin disappear or whatsoever.
Okay, a lot of great stuff there, right? So a lot of ideas that will come up will be, can we evacuate the building? Can we get those civilians out? And of course, if you start doing that, you lose any type of surprise that you may have in an attack. But to your point about different ways we can do it, can we take it through special forces? Can we take it through using a sniper? I mean, all these different ideas of how can you attack floor 4 and 5 and not hurt floors 1, 2, and 3. Another way of doing it is you could just take on the building at night when all those businesses are closed and none of those people are there. But the fact of the matter is there'll be a night watchman, an innocent civilian who just goes to work each day, or a night janitor. And will his death, and again, I don't want to sound cavalier, one death is a tragedy, but will his death be excessive in light of the direct and concrete military advantage to be anticipated? Now let's go to the big question. Let's say Putin's there and we know he's only there for lunch. And we don't know how he got in the building and we don't know how he's getting out of the building. But we know we have a very short window and he's only there for lunch. So we're gonna have to drop a bomb on that building. Well, how many people in those other 3 floors, how many people in that balancing test would it take for us to think that it was excessive? 10, 20, 30, 40? When I do this exercise in person, I'll have everyone raise their hand and I'll give a scenario just like that. And then I'll ask them to drop their hand when I've gone too far. And I can go 50, 60, 70, 70 civilians are gonna die, but we're gonna get Putin. And I'll have some people with their hand up, 100, 110, 120. So there's no perfect answer to that, but facts matter. And of course, as lawyers, facts always matter to us. Facts matter. Will it be excessive in light of the anticipated military advantage to be gained? So this is proportionality. And this is why when I hear from time to time, people say, well, civilians cannot die in armed conflict. It's illegal for civilians to die in armed conflict. That is an incorrect statement. Civilians will die in armed conflict, and some of them will die in a legal manner. Civilians cannot be targeted in armed conflict. That is illegal. That is a war crime. So for instance, you're talking about civilians fleeing. I've been working with the last several months with my colleagues at the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine, and they just put out a preliminary report. And one of the things that they highlighted in the number of war crimes that they've indicated that the Russians have committed is the Russian armed forces shooting at civilians attempting to flee. Under no scenario would that be allowed, right? They're targeting civilians, clearly a war crime. These aren't civilians who happen to be walking by a building and then the building gets hit by a bomb, a lawful military target. Let's say they're walking by a tank. A tank is a lawful military target, and you happen to be the poor unlucky person that is walking by the tank when a missile comes in and blows up the tank. Your death, while a tragedy, is not unlawful, as opposed to targeting those civilians or indiscriminately just dropping bombs into civilian areas, because now you're violating the rule of distinction. The last of the 4 is humanity. Sometimes you'll see it listed as unnecessary suffering, honorable conduct. In humanity, I kind of encompass all of that. And this is the concept that you cannot do things that are designed for unnecessary suffering. So this is how we wage war in the methods that we use, the weapons and the methods that we use. So this is when you start talking about things like weaponry that would cause that unnecessary suffering. Different types of weapons. So whether you're talking about using white phosphorus as a weapon, or napalm, or a flamethrower, all different types of weapons like this. From time to time, people, when I have this conversation, will say, well, what about cluster munitions? Cluster munitions, when the bomb goes and it disperses cluster munitions, and then those cluster munitions blow up. It depends. Cluster munitions, if they're being fired at a military target, let's say they're being fired at advancing troops on a battlefield, those cluster munitions would be perfectly legal. The problem with cluster munitions is the dispersal rate will often put it outside of the distinction area. So you may be shooting for this, but the cluster munitions spread so far and wide that you've gone beyond distinction, and now you're dropping some into civilian areas. Sometimes cluster munitions don't blow up, but unexploded ordnance is a difficulty with all different types of ordnance, not just cluster munitions. I mean, any type of weapon could fail, but still it's a very dangerous thing sitting in someone's yard. What the Russians have done, though, is something a little different. They've launched some missiles that go and land in your yard, your civilian yard, and not near any military targets. And it's a delayed fuse, so that bomb's going to go off in the coming 24 hours. So we've seen cases of that where they're putting out delayed fuse missiles, which again would violate the rule of distinction. Because if you're shooting at a tank, which is a proper target, you're distinguishing that as a proper target, and you take that tank out, perfectly legal. But now you just drop a bomb in the middle of the street and no one knows when it's going to blow up, just like a landmine. A landmine per se, I understand the convention against landmines, but per se, a landmine is not an unlawful use in a military situation. The problem with landmines is when they get left behind and now they become indiscriminate killers. So the actual landmine itself isn't the issue. It's the indiscriminate action that the landmine that is left behind could cause. I did a lot of work in Mozambique in the 90s. And at that time, there was one landmine for every 8 people. And so doing any work, and I did a lot of work up country in Beira and Nampula, and doing any work required you to stay very much on a well-worn path. You did not even go a foot outside of the well-worn path because there were just so many landmines everywhere. So it's the indiscriminate part that takes it out. Another piece on unnecessary suffering would be the use of torture, would be the use of sexual violence as a weapon of war. All of this is unnecessary suffering. All of this falls under the humanity that would be violated. So military necessity, distinction, proportionality, and military necessity. Now, I started this by saying none of this applies unless there's an armed conflict. That's when the law of armed conflict applies, when there's an armed conflict. So we made that determination, certainly an easy one. As I said, Russia invading Ukraine, armed conflict. All right, now let's start our investigation looking at what the Russians have done. And we're using our understanding of our fundamental principles. But the first thing we have to acknowledge, again, is that there is an armed conflict. When we did the investigation into what happened to the Rohingya, it was actually quite easy to determine that crimes against humanity and genocide had taken place. And there were an awful lot of crimes that would have fit under war crimes as well. But the issue was there an armed conflict? There can be no war crimes if there's not an armed conflict. Okay. So war crimes are the first piece that we're looking at and understanding what the law of armed conflict is. The next one is that we're looking at with respect to what the Russians are doing with crimes against humanity. Crimes against humanity, as many of you know, it's when it's widespread or systematic. So one of the ways I differentiate between the two when I'm in the field doing investigation is again, the facts. A soldier kills a civilian. Again, tragic, but probably a war crime. Many soldiers killing many civilians, that it's widespread or systematic, now it may rise to the level of crimes against humanity. What's the plan here? What's the organizational effort? What are they doing? You know, in the dissolution of Yugoslavia, rape was certainly used as a weapon of war there as well. And the Serbian military at one point rounded up Muslim women and put them in the Foča High School gymnasium, and then repeatedly raped them over a period of weeks. And while doing so, telling them that they were impregnating them with Serb seed, and they understood they were violating their not just their bodies, but their religion and their culture, and so on and so forth. Clearly crimes against humanity. There's a widespread or systematic effort to undertake this violence against this population. As tragic as one soldier raping a woman in an armed conflict is, that would be a war crime. But when you start layering in and looking at the overall broader organization, that's when we start talking about crimes against humanity. And then, of course, at the top of this hierarchical pyramid is genocide. And genocide has a very specific meaning under the 1948 Genocide Convention. It's a specific intent crime, meaning we must specifically intend for this to happen. So it's the intent to destroy in whole or in part based on your race, ethnicity, religion, or nationality. So one of the issues that's being talked about is there genocide going on in Ukraine? Are the Russians intending to destroy, to exterminate this population in whole or in part because of their race, religion, ethnicity, or nationality? There's been some interesting conversations, some interesting statements that the Russians have made talking about how the Ukrainians don't exist, they're not a real people, they shouldn't exist. That helps us with that evidence. But even after that, the intent to destroy in whole or in part based on race, religion, ethnicity, nationality, that there's a colon, and then it has a list of things by killing them, by attempting to kill them, by creating conditions that bring about their destruction. But further down that list is the transferring of children. If you're transferring of children from one population to another population, and you're doing it based on race, religion, ethnicity, or nationality, then that could qualify as a genocide. Of course, Genocide Convention was written based on what the Germans had done. It was done in 1948, as I said, and it was done in a way that is imperfect. Many people have complained it didn't include political, it didn't include gender, it didn't include sexual orientation. In 1948, that wasn't going to happen. They were not going to get the convention done in 1948 if they included any of that. And so the reality of it is that over time in our community, we have not expanded the genocide definition. When we did the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia, for Rwanda, Sierra Leone, Cambodia, the International Criminal Court, we simply took the Genocide Convention and moved it and put it whole cloth right into the convention. We have not expanded upon that, because the idea is that we'll spend more time talking about that than actually getting the court going. What we have done is we've expanded crimes against humanity. Crimes against humanity came out of, as its genesis, Nuremberg, but we've expanded that. It now includes sexual violence. It now includes rape. It now includes forced pregnancy and sexual slavery. That's all included in crimes against humanity when we have it written out in the ICC, in the Rome Convention, or in some of the other conventions. So we've expanded that. But there is no standalone treaty for crimes against humanity. So it's customary international law that we have put into the ICC treaty. So as we look at this and we start talking about the transferring of children, there's upwards of 2,000 children that have been transferred out of Ukraine and then been adopted by Russian families. So they're transferring children from one population to another population. And believe it or not, in a lot of conversations we've had, that may be one of the strongest charges towards a genocide with respect to what the Russians are doing. Because that's something that is easily trackable when you're actually doing that. Sometimes it's harder when, well, there's a lot of people who are dead, but why are they dead? We got to get back to the specific intent. So casualties sometimes don't tell the whole story. So what we're doing over the last several months is there's a lot of different entities that are doing investigations, interviewing victims and witnesses, like the IICI in Ukraine, interviewing witnesses, interviewing victims. And one of the things that we did in an organization that I work with called Public International Law and Policy Group is we've decided to meet the victims where they are. So we've undertaken an effort to do this investigation by using Zoom and using technology that can secure our lines, that can secure our database. Of course, we're dealing with the Russians, one of the most sophisticated cyber attackers in the world. But unlike the Bangladesh situation where we could go to a refugee camp that had 700,000 people in it and we could just keep moving through the camp until we reached a sufficient number of interviews. The Ukrainian refugees are scattered around the world. They're certainly scattered around Poland. I spent most of the summer on the Ukrainian border in Poland doing these investigations, but finding people to talk to has been extraordinarily hard. So what we've done is we're speaking to them through Zoom and taking their statements through Zoom, and so that's been an interesting way to approach it, using all this technology we've learned through COVID that we've all gotten used to over the last couple of years. But it's an interesting way to approach it as we undertake this investigation. Now, where will these courts take place? How will we prosecute the Russians? The fact of the matter is, there's been conversations about the ICC. There's been conversations about setting up an ad hoc tribunal of some kind in Europe, some type of agreement with Ukraine and the European Union. There's been a conversation where my colleagues and we did a draft of a high war crimes court, a special court, a domestic court in Ukraine, where you could train the judges, the prosecutors, and the defense counsel. And don't forget the defense counsel, because you have to have equality of arms. If you're going to have true accountability, it has to be done in a manner that people see justice being done. And then lastly, or do they just use their own domestic courts, their standing domestic courts in Ukraine right now? Obviously, again, that would require a great deal of training for judges and prosecutors. But the fact of the matter is, ultimately, Ukraine has to decide what they want to do with respect to how they want to carry out the accountability. The long pole in the tent is, this is an aggressive war, and that Russia is clearly violating the crime of aggression. I think that's true. I don't think anybody's going to dispute that. But prosecuting the crime of aggression is a difficult one. First of all, where are you going to do it? In all likelihood, even though crime of aggression is a crime with the ICC, it is only allowed in certain circumstances, and Ukraine and Russia, neither one of them are parties to the ICC. So they're not going to be able to prosecute the aggression there. And then even if you do select a tribunal, let's say you set up an ad hoc tribunal or UN-based tribunal, whatever, if you do select a tribunal, how far can you go? Yes, we'd love to see Putin in the dock. We'd love to see him in trial. Personally, I don't believe he'll ever stand trial. I just don't think that's ever going to happen. But how far down the chain of command can you prosecute the crime of aggression? Certainly his commanding general, right? But then who? Then the deputy, then battalion commanders. How far down can you prosecute aggression? When we look at war crimes, I don't think the low-ranking guys, except for the one or two that have been caught by the Ukrainians and then have pled guilty, I don't think the low-ranking guys are probably ever going to stand trial, because when this conflict is over, and God willing that's soon, but when it's over, those lance corporals and privates and corporals are going to go back to their farm in Siberia and never leave the farm ever again. So what we've been focusing on is that what we call field grade officers, from major up to colonel, because these are the men and women who are in charge of that individual soldier on the ground. These are the men and women that have been receiving orders from above. And these are the men and women that years from now, and it may be years from now, that are going to want to leave their lovely apartment in Moscow and take their family on holiday to Croatia. And we're going to have their name on a list. And that's when we're going to pick them up when they cross the border. And that's how we're going to get accountability for some of these crimes. I don't know if you saw the Bellingcat article that came out in the last 2 days. If you haven't seen it, it's fantastic. Kudos to our friends at Bellingcat. But they basically named and shown pictures of 33 people that are putting in the targeting coordinates and that are indiscriminately hitting civilian buildings. I mean, that's war crimes 101, if you're just blasting away at civilian buildings. And these people, I can only think that these people thought that they were sitting comfortably in Moscow and St. Petersburg, you know, drinking their large coffee, sleeping in their own bed at night, you know, playing with their kids on the weekends, that they would be untouched by this war. And now there's 33 names. Now
is it possible to get a link to that?
Yeah, I will, I bet if you Google Bellingcat, it'll be in the top of their website. Because
We
it
should
is,
send it to everybody here. It's
Yeah.
really just vital.
yeah, it's a remarkable article. It's just remarkable piece of investigative work that they put together. It's a game changer.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's quite all right. It's just these people are never going to be able to leave Russia. They will be picked up. Thank you, Christina. I appreciate that. Their name's on a list now, and they're going to be locked in Russia. And I know that doesn't sound like a bad thing, right? So, I mean, if you were told you could never leave your country, yeah, most people maybe that wouldn't impact. But the feeling of being confined, even in your own country, is one that I think has an impact. But the other reason why we're aiming at the field grade officers is because we want them to know we're watching. And Bellingcat is a perfect example. We want them to know we're watching, because the fact of the matter is, as my team's out there doing victims and witness statements, we know the intelligence agencies of all the Western countries are hard at work. And all we have to do is figure out what unit is where as they're blasting away, killing civilians in Bucha or whatever other town. We'll figure out what unit that is. And we'll figure out what the chain of command is in that unit. And we'll find out who the lieutenant colonel, the colonel, and the general are for that unit. And those people are going to be held accountable. See, under the law of armed conflict, there's also this concept of command responsibility. So command responsibility, basically the idea that as a commander, if you're ordering your people to commit war crimes, you're responsible, that we can prosecute you for those war crimes. So even if there's technically no blood on your hands, we can prosecute you for those war crimes. Command responsibility also gives us the concept that if the commander knew or should have known that his men were out there committing war crimes, then he is also responsible. Because the commander, even though he didn't order it, even though he never did anything himself, the commander is responsible for his men and women that fall under his responsibility. And so we hold the commander responsible if his units are out there committing war crimes. So this is where I think we're going to have the most success in this area. So whether it be war crimes or crimes against humanity or maybe even genocide, but this is where we're going to have the most success in this area of these field grade officers. I think we're going to have the best luck there. Okay, before I open it up to questions, and certainly I welcome any questions. So when I met with the Center for Civil Liberties last week, they had a whole bunch of questions for me. And one of the things that intrigued them was whether or not law of armed conflict, or IHL, International Humanitarian Law, if you prefer, whether or not that regulated the practice of conscripting prisoners. We've all heard the stories of the Russians going into the prisons and offering time off from sentences to put on a uniform and go fight for the Russians, or frankly, the Russians just holding a draft. I think what 250, 270,000 men immediately on the announcement of the draft fled, went across the border and went to some other country, but there's still a fair amount that ended up in uniform. And whether or not IHL impacts that. And the short answer is no. Countries can decide how they want to put their military together, whether it's an all-volunteer force, whether it's a draft, conscription, et cetera, mandatory service. IHL would step in if they were using child soldiers. So if they were conscripting child soldiers, if they're putting child soldiers on the battlefield, that's when IHL would impact on who they're sending to the fight. Another question they asked is, how would POWs, Russian POWs, be allowed to participate in the reconstruction? So envisioning a post-war Ukraine, would they be allowed to be used for reconstruction? Short answer, no. The longer answer is, once hostilities were over, all POWs must be sent back. All POWs must be exchanged and sent home. And then the reality of it is that even if during the armed conflict and you had POWs, I would strongly recommend not using POWs for any type of labor, even though the Geneva Conventions do allow you to use them for labor as long as you pay them. so it's technically not slave labor, as long as that labor is not dangerous, and as long as they're safe and well fed and have medical care. But the reality of it is, I don't think you want to get into the optics of that, the public relations campaign that the Russians would then undertake, that you're using Russian POWs as slave labor, even though you could say, no, we're paying them. Look, here are the records, we're paying them. I don't think that's an argument you want to get into. As the old saying goes, if you wrestle with a pig, you're both going to end up getting muddy. And so it's one of those that you probably don't want to wrestle with that pig. And then the last question that they wanted to know about, because we've heard a lot about the UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles or drones, particularly the Iranian drones, these kamikaze drones that loiter in place and then go down and blow up. The fact of the matter is UAVs are 100% legal in armed conflict, legal, they're lawful, but they have to follow the same rules. What are they hitting? What are they targeting? If they're targeting civilians, then it's a war crime. If they're targeting a tank, then it's a perfectly good targeting of a military objective. So, okay. I want to leave time for questions and comments or thoughts from my colleagues, from any of the students, except for poor Mafalda, who had to get on a bus. I feel terrible now that I called on her and she had to make her way to the bus. But all right, questions, comments, concerns, thoughts. What do you think?
Greg, I have a question.
Please do, sir.
I'm in a bit of a debate with a colleague in Lithuania about genocide. And I'm reminded of a recent argument that a professor made, that there's no intent to destroy Ukrainians as a nation, a people, all that, because this is just the way the Russians work.
Yeah.
They do scorched earth. It's the same in Afghanistan. It's the same everywhere.
Same in Syria. Same in Syria.
Yeah, Syria. So we don't have that problem, the genocide specific intent, narrow language problem from the drafters. You commented about moving the children, which, boy, really smells like genocide. But I just wondered, in general, how you come down on this topic, this subtopic.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right in everything you said. And the fact of the matter is, I don't think we're there yet. I think we need more evidence, and hopefully there'll be, our hope is none of this is happening, but the reality of it is that there'll be a smoking gun order somewhere.
Yeah.
And this is how we prosecuted the Nazis, despite the fact we all knew what the Nazis did. We prosecuted them with paper. We wheeled in wheelbarrows full of paper. And
I'm going to send you a carton of oranges or something,
Yeah.
or cigars, because that's the position I've taken, and I'm a little intimidated.
I don't think we're there yet. And I work with a lot of Ukrainians. I have a Ukrainian lawyer on my team, and I talk to her daily. And I understand how she wants to proceed, and I understand how she wants to make that argument. But as an old former federal prosecutor, I always envision things that I have to take this into court, and I have to be able to prove this. So, Robert Petit is a colleague of mine, and he was the international prosecutor on the extraordinary chambers of the criminal courts of Cambodia, and prosecuting over there. And one of the first challenges he had when taking over that position was explaining to the Cambodian people that they were not the victim of a genocide. After 20, 30 years being told Cambodian genocide, Cambodian genocide, Cambodian genocide. Not to say that they weren't the victim of a horrific, horrible 1.5 to 2 million people dead under the Khmer Rouge, but really most, if not all, were killed for political reasons. Or were killed because they wore glasses, because that indicated they were educated, or they're doctors, lawyers, professors, everyone on this screen, right? But crimes against humanity is a pretty powerful charge as well, and we can't lose sight of that. That genocide just has a very narrow window to get in. Crimes against humanity, it's an awfully big and powerful, and frankly, the punishment will be the same. So whether you're at a tribunal that allows the death penalty or does not allow the death penalty, if you're convicted of crimes against humanity, you're convicted of genocide, the punishment will be the same. I get the historical record. A lot of what we do in taking witness and victim statements is about creating a historical record, because we want to make sure that we get people contemporaneous with the event to give the most accurate depiction of what happened. But I don't know that we're there yet, Pat. I just don't think we are.
Thanks.
Other thoughts, other ideas? Yes, sir. Go ahead, Frieder.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this wonderful talk and all the information you gave us, basically first-hand information. It was extremely thrilling. And I was wondering if I might ask a question which goes a little bit beyond the questions of crimes against humanity but which deals also with war crimes. And one reads from time to time that in the occupied areas, the Russian forces are, well, destroying artifacts and stealing cultural property of the Ukrainian people. And I was wondering if it also sort of gets some attention from the point of view of fact-finding and assembling evidence in order to pursue those crimes as well. I totally understand that it might not be the top priority if one is talking about crimes against humanity, which is involving people but still the cultural heritage of a nation and of a society is still of an immense importance to the nation, and therefore I was wondering if that also is sort of being discovered, being examined. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. And you're 100% right. And it is a violation of the law of armed conflict to destroy cultural property. But getting back to Pat's point and to the point that you're making is that some of this could also be evidence towards genocide. I mean, if they're destroying the cultural property, if they're trying to destroy this nationality from existing, that could be used as the circumstantial evidence that they do have an intent to destroy. They're trying to wipe this group off the face of the earth and trying to erase them. So that actually is cuts two ways. Definitely a war crime. You can't loot, you can't steal stuff, you can't steal, and cultural property is protected. I mean, personal property is protected. I mean, you can, for lack of a better word, commandeer personal property if you need it in the fight of the war. So let's say you're in a conflict and your vehicle breaks down, you can hotwire the car in the guy's driveway and drive away with it. But you can't go in his house and steal the money from under his bed. That dead body, you can't desecrate the dead, but you can certainly search the dead for intelligence. You can look and see if he has any paperwork on him. If for some reason your boots were shot and you needed new boots, you could take the dead guy's boots. But all that has military purposes. You can't take the dead guy's wedding ring. You can't take the dead guy's wallet with his money and his credit cards in it. You can't do any of that. So if it has a military purpose, yes, for private property, but cultural property, completely forbidden, off limits. Christina, you look like you have another question. Anytime.
No, my other question was about the environment also, because I have seen an awful picture yesterday and in news that a lot of dolphins are being found dead already next to Odessa, and a lot of my beautiful country nature is damaged. A lot of things are being damaged, and is there going to be any punishment for that also? Is there going to be viewed as crime against environment?
Yeah, so what I would look at it, and we had this conversation in the first Gulf War when Saddam lit all the oil wells on fire. I will tell you, Patrick knows this, but I spent the better part of the 90s training the Ukrainian military. Spent a lot of time in Crimea and Kharkiv and Kyiv. In one of the facilities that we visited in Crimea was a dolphin facility. It was a leftover from the Soviet times where they trained dolphins to be like strap mines on top of dolphins and sent them in to blow up ships. That was an old Soviet idea. But now you have all these dolphins that have grown up in captivity. So the Ukrainians had to continue to care for them because they couldn't be released. They wouldn't have made it if they released them. So, but to your point about the environment, we'd have to look at all the facts. Like why were they targeted? Was it incidental to a lawful military targeting? Are they simply trying to pollute the water? Are they trying to pollute the air? And really, and the environment's as important to me as it is to you and everyone else, I'm sure. But is it really an effort to harm civilians? Like if you're polluting water, you can't poison the water, right? And if you're just letting the forest fire rage because you know eventually it will burn down town number 1 and then town number 2 and town number 2, town number 3, then and you set this fire knowing this was going to happen, then we'd start talking about a war crime, that they were putting this together, and if not a war crime, then crimes against humanity, because they were creating the conditions that brought about the death of these people, the death or the injury of these people. So the environment's always, and it's an unsatisfying answer for my environmental friends that, oh, well, he's going to be prosecuted for environmental crimes. It'll be prosecuted, but may not say environmental crimes. It'll be part and parcel to some other prosecution. At least that's how I think the prosecutors would go about it. But you know, as a lawyer and as law professors, we know that new law is made by C+ students, because C+ students don't have all the law committed to memory, and they take it before a judge and they convince a judge, and then they convince another judge, and then they convince another judge. The next thing you know, the Supreme Court says, that's a good idea. And that's how a lot of new law is done. So there'll be someone maybe smarter than me, maybe less smarter than me, who will pursue that and to great success. So great question, Christine. Yes, and Consolatrice, am I saying?
Yes, that's it. I wanted to ask, do you think they are going to create like a special judicial tribunal for the, maybe, I don't know, the Vladimir Putin, or is it not possible? Because I know that we have some charges on the international court, but are they going to create a special tribunal like, I don't know, Nuremberg tribunal or the International Tribunal for the Genocide in Rwanda, something like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that I think the Ukrainians need to make that decision, whether or not they want to pursue domestic courts, whether or not to pursue a domestic special tribunal, a hybrid tribunal, what they want the ICC to do. Look, the ICC, they take a long time. The ICC is not a fast-moving entity. And so, but ultimately we want to, and we're working with the Ukrainians. We meet with the Prosecutor General's office regularly. In fact, I have in the Public International Law and Policy Group, which Roger Williams University supports, we've set up working groups on prosecuting genocide, aggression, crimes against humanity, war crimes. Because in one of our meetings with the Prosecutor General in Ukraine, he said, look, you know what I don't need? I don't need another 300-page legal memo telling me what I should be doing. And he pointed to a shelf off screen. He said, I have a shelf full of those. He said, what I need is a very concise, compact strategy on how I'm going to prosecute these cases. So we're putting that together for him now. And the reality of it is, I don't know. There's a lot of talk on the tribunals, on which is the best, I'm a believer in the Ukrainians need to speak. I know other people think, well, no, we should do this as an international community. I'd really like the Ukrainians to weigh in after some thoughtful conversations with them and giving them the pros and cons. So that's what I'm waiting for. But great question. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
First of all, let me thank you for your magnificent lecture. And from my point of view, that I live all my life in peace, and I'm a warrior that fights for peace. It's a little bit strange when we try to adopt and concretize our concepts to a war situation. You were talking about proportionality. How can we measure proportionality in the case of the 5 floors? Is it if one person dies more than military one, is not already a violation of proportionality, or we need 10, 15? How can we measure?
Yeah.
And on the other hand, this kind of tools that we use, and they are very important, of humanitarian law, they are a little bit, let us say, old-fashioned, because in the old times, it was difficult, it was easy to see who was fighting with whom. And it was a reduced number of persons. And now everything is mixed, and the populations are side to side with militaries and so on. So it's not easy to separate things. So I don't know, and there's something that I would like to hear from you that know much more than me about this. If we should also try to reconstruct our concepts in order they can be used in this kind of situation, because what we assist is something that has no balances, no possible balances, and let us say that the war itself is a crime, but how can we apply law against this war crime, finding for new small crimes and so on? Is that a way, a proper way to do it, or should we just consider the whole picture as something dreadful and must be against the law? So many questions, but I really enjoyed your lecture, and I was indeed touched by what you said.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate that, and I know we're close on time, so I'll try to address them quickly. People ask me all the time, there's a law of armed conflict? Like there are rules with armed conflict? How do you even do that? And the reality of it is, my position is, it's the best we've got. And the law at its baseline is to protect those who cannot protect themselves. So to protect those who cannot protect themselves, civilians, sick, wounded, shipwrecked, POWs, humanitarian aid workers, medical, religious, we've set aside these categories. And the other fascinating thing about this body of law is that a lot of other laws will say, okay, it is against the law to do these 5 things, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's it. This body of law has to meet this delicate balance of being restrictive yet permissive. Because if we just wrote the law of armed conflict and it was so restrictive that when the president says to his general, I want you to achieve that military objective, and the general goes, no, with these rules I can't, so let's just throw them out and let me do my business. And so it's that delicate balance of allowing the military objective to be achieved, but protecting along the way. And to your first point about proportionality, very difficult. No, it's a very difficult, whether 1 or 10 or 20, it's very difficult. That's why, honestly, we don't see many, really any prosecutions on the violation of proportionality, because usually it's easier just to prosecute on an indiscriminate attack of civilians or targeting of civilians. With proportionality, I mean, think about it from a prosecutor's point of view. I need to convince a jury that what this person did, failed. Now, with that said, any military person can tell you about proportionality. They understand. Vladimir Putin knows these rules. I mean, this is not, the Russian military knows these rules, because I also spent time in Russia training them on these rules. And so they know these rules. And the fact of the matter is they're disregarding, and as Pat said, they're fighting it the same way they fought Afghanistan, Chechnya, Syria, and today in Ukraine. And frankly, go back to World War II. Many of you are in Europe. You have a close understanding of World War II. We don't even understand all the numbers when you deal with the Soviets, as far as Soviets deaths and Soviets killed. And because they just fought a different way than everyone else fought. And so they're problematic in that respect. But to your point, sir, it's just the best we have. And we try to do the best we can with it. And it's most certainly not perfect, but no body of law is. But we undertake many different ways to get people to follow it. So if you don't like the law, fine. If you don't like morals and ethics, fine. Let's go to pragmatic. It's much better to fight it right from a pragmatic standpoint. If you're not doing distinction, your likelihood of engaging in friendly fire is significantly higher. So now you're killing your own men. If you're not following the rules of treating, of not torturing people, the likelihood that your guys will be tortured, maybe not in this conflict, but certainly the next conflict, is definitely higher. And so you will reap what you sow if you want to abandon these rules as a military man and just kind of go out and make it into the wild, wild west. I can tell you, soldiers that I know from countries around the world, they don't want to be out there with cowboys. They want to be out there with disciplined fighters who follow the rules, because everybody knows what the rules are, and we can achieve so much more within those rules than people just, shooting everything that moves. That's an undisciplined way of fighting. Rafaela Mascara put a great question, and I'm not sure, Demetrius, how much time do we have, or are we already past time?
As much as you would like, actually,
Oh,
but
okay.
we're not actually so much past time.
Okay.
You can consider to have another half an hour question and answer session after the 45 minutes of lecture. So
I'll definitely be charging you overtime, though, just so you know. So Rafaela put a great question in the chat, and he basically said, what about at the end of the war when the Russian soldiers say, I was just following orders? That is not a defense. Nuremberg decided that was not a defense. You cannot say I was just following orders. Now, this is tricky. Not that legal concept. That legal concept is enshrined in international law. But it's tricky in that we train military men and women, and we send them to basic training. We shave their head. We get them up at 4 o'clock in the morning. We run them through mud and swamps and streams, and we're breaking them down in order to build them up as part of this cohesive entity, this military unit, this military structure. I mean, they wear uniforms. I mean, the word uniform means we all look alike. It's all uniform, right? And so, but what we don't do is we don't take out their capacity to think and their capacity to make decisions. We take other things out. I mean, we need to move this way. We need to move that way, and they need to move quickly. But we don't take out their capacity to think. And the fact of the matter is that if you receive an order that is on its face illegal, you have the duty, the requirement, the legality to disobey that order. So if you receive an illegal order, you cannot follow it. And the way that we train is, first you ask for clarification. Sir, did you just say you wanted me to take all the women down to the river and shoot them? Yes, I did. Okay, so clarification didn't work. And then secondly, you're allowed to go up the chain of command, around the person issuing the order, or out of the chain of command. So you're allowed to go up or out, you're allowed to bypass that individual who's issuing the order. Because if you follow that order and you take all the women to the river and you shoot them, and then we're at your trial later, you're gonna go down for that because you knew it was an illegal order. Now, the more difficult question would be, well, he told me to do this, and I'm not that bright, and it didn't sound illegal to me. Okay, so take all these people, put them over here, and watch them. Okay, well, what's wrong with that? But once you're saying eliminate, kill, shoot, you know, we have a problem. We have a problem. So you cannot use "I was just following orders" as a defense. All right, I think we have time for one last question. Unfortunately, Demetrius, I have a meeting that I have to get to on with respect to Ukraine, as a matter of fact. So, but go ahead. Is it Malika? I'm sure I'm saying your name wrong, but
no, that's correct. Thank you for the opportunity, by the way, and also this great session. Thank you. I would like to ask a question about the, as we all know, there is a pending case on the ICJ, which is Ukraine against Russia regarding the Genocide Convention. I would like to hear your thoughts with all the respect. One of the judges declared probably this case cannot be directly addressed by the application of Genocide Convention, but the court should decide it anyway. So I would like to hear your thoughts about the judge's declaration in the scope of morality, please.
yeah, thank you. It's a great question, and I didn't hear that judge say that, but I will say this: the ICJ is exactly the place that you take a genocide case to. I mean, the Genocide Convention very specifically tells you to go to the ICJ. And then, of course, as we know, the ICJ is state versus state. So Ukraine taking Russia into the ICJ. I would be surprised if they said, "Oh, we can't hear this." That doesn't make sense to me. That's exactly where they should hear. In fact, with genocide, anybody could take Russia in. Right now, the Gambia is taking Myanmar to the ICJ. The Gambia has absolutely no connection to the Rohingya except a shared religion. And so we've been working with the lawyer representing the Gambia for the last couple of years on this. And so that's exactly the forum for it. So I'm not sure what the judge said, but if he's saying that that's not the place, then I don't understand why he would say that, because the ICJ is exactly the place. Now we get back to the factual issue of whether or not we have the facts to prove it. That's a different story. But I think that's exactly the forum. Now, the less satisfying part of international law is, okay, so then what? Let's say the ICJ says you're guilty. So then what? The Corfu Channel case still hasn't been paid. So then what? And so the fact is that it will impact what I refer to as the court of world opinion. And it's not a real court, it doesn't exist, but how the world views you is important in every aspect of your life as a nation, whether it be economic, reputational, interaction, whatever. It matters. I was in Cameroon training the Cameroonian Special Forces. And at that, in an Amnesty International report came out saying that the Cameroonian Special Forces were torturing people. So we took that opportunity to have a really long conversation. And at the end of it all, I told them, do you want everyone in the world thinking you guys are a bunch of torturers? Do you want people, when they hear Cameroon, they go, oh, isn't that a place where they torture people? And that will impact how people view you and how they interact with you. So, so I hope that answer helps. But I think the ICJ is the proper place, is a proper place, not the only place, it's a proper place.
Thank you for your explanation.
Yeah, no problem. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And I know I said this earlier before we started, but I love all the Portuguese names because I grew up with so many Portuguese families And so I feel like it's old home week on some of these, on some of the names that I'm seeing on the screen here. So thank you for this opportunity, for this privilege to meet with you. Thank you for those wonderful questions. I still feel bad. The poor Nunez woman was getting on the bus and she couldn't help. But thank you so much, and I look forward to spending more time with all of you and hearing your future lectures. I've got the whole list of all the future lectures, so I'll be there.